All right, this meeting is being live streamed. All right, this meeting is being live streamed. Oh. And Marika warned me I need to figure out how to mute YouTube. Okay, I think we may be ready to go. So, all right, is everyone viewing the slides? Wonderful. All right, let's go ahead and get started with the second presentations from the Code for Philly Tech Fellows. My name is Julia Shugard, and I'm a member of the Code for Philly leadership team. I will be your MC this evening. I'd like to start off by thanking our sponsor, Comcast. They've provided the funds for our Tech Fellowship last year as well as this year, so we're grateful that they helped make this happen. The fellowship this year had 3 roles, one for a data analyst, one for a project manager, and one for UX design. Each fellow worked about 10 hours a week for 8 weeks on their project. And the goal of the fellowship was to allow people who are somewhat new to tech to have paid experience on their resume. The idea is that by identifying people, particularly who are underrepresented in tech, we're hoping that finding a role in the tech industry will be made more accessible. And last year, 75% of our tech fellows found jobs in tech, so we have a good track record going so far. In addition to the work, the fellows had career development opportunities. Shout out to Claire and Sarah, who helped them learn about writing and speaking in tech. And also a big thank you to the mentors who read every application they received and then worked with their mentees throughout the fellowship. They considered the applicants based on the selection criteria that you can see summarized here, such as how well the applicant would benefit from the fellowship, do they have the current tech skills and willingness to contribute, the time to contribute, the collaborative skills for working with project team members, and importantly, bringing more diverse voices to Code for Philly. So with that, let me introduce our 3 fellowship mentors this year. They were Julia Schomburg, who is also a member of the Code for Philly leadership team, and she was our mentor for UX design. Billy Hannafy, who was the mentor for project management and is the project lead for Flask, one of the longstanding Code for Philly projects. And Zachary Lahan, who was the mentor for the data analysis track and the project lead for the Pennsylvania Wildflower Project. So thank you very much to our mentors this year. We would like to start with Zachary. If you could tell us just briefly why you wanted to mentor, a little bit about your experience with the fellowship, and then introduce your fellow for us.
Yeah, sure. Anthony's going to tell you plenty about the tool that's called choosenativeplants.com. But we're a product team that had a design, had a good vision, started the build, but parts of the data of the plants that go into the database were missing, needed to be enriched, needed to be improved. And we were eager to have an intern join, and Anthony joined the team and was really impactful. I can't steal any of his thunder, but that's the gist of it. And we're really happy he was part of the team.
All right, wonderful. So Anthony, would you like to take it away with your presentation?
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for the introduction, Zach, and thanks to all the folks at Code for Philly. My name is Anthony Hopkins, and I'm here tonight to talk about my journey with Code for Philly as the data analyst and data engineering fellow. Before I get into specifics about the project, I'd like to share a little bit about myself and what brought me here. Next slide, please. I am originally from Philly. I was born and raised in a little neighborhood called Fox Chase. And although I started out doing a lot of research in biology, I ultimately landed in electrical engineering at the University of Pittsburgh. I spent a couple of years in the field in a more hands-on role and then as a desk engineer, but nothing really felt right. So similar to many other folks in 2020, I lost my job at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And at that time, I'd been doing a lot of community organizing around climate justice, and I was deeply involved in the Philly chapter of the Sunrise Movement. So while I was organizing, I came across a documentary called Coded Bias that discusses the harms inherent to artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. I always wanted to better synchronize my social justice and scientific bones, and this documentary helped me to kind of get more motivated to get back into school. So I enrolled in UPenn's Data Analytics and Visualization Bootcamp. I was accepted, fortunately, and I took a deep dive into data and learned how to manipulate it while hoping to eventually contribute to impactful progress in the data world through the lens of social justice. Next slide, please, and cue Code for Philly. I came across this group shortly after graduating, and I was super excited to contribute and build my skills with a group of volunteer developers on important projects. I applied for the fellowship, and I was humbled to discover that I was selected to work on the Choose Native Plants web application. This felt like a perfect start for me, not to mention a good combination of my climate justice work and some data nerd abilities. Next slide, please. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the application itself. So the Choose Native Plants web and mobile application is a tool for amateur gardeners and plant folks who want to help build up Pennsylvania's ecosystem from the ground up. If you're just starting out as a plant person, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. Working on the project and learning the data alone was just a lot. So I can imagine just getting started can feel really crazy. So how do you pick the right plant, right? Will it survive here? Will it have a negative impact on the animals and insects in my area? Where could I even find this plant that I like? The question list can kind of be seemingly endless. So our application makes it easy for you to tailor your search to the basics. How much sun will the plant need? Or how much sun will it get? How much water will it need? What color would I want my plant to be? Can I find it at a local nursery? We have a really tremendous amount of filtration to help you make a decision based on what you're looking for. Our goal, though, is to make this process easy for you and to help keep the ecosystem of Pennsylvania healthy. Because more native plants means more native insects, and more native insects means things like more native birds. And a happier ecosystem is something that we can all kind of thrive better a little bit under. So next slide, please. The Choose Native Plants team is a ragtag group of volunteer developers with a diverse skill set. It can range anywhere from full stack development and data to UX UI. So shout out to everybody on the team, Tom, Okio, Roxanne, Christina, and obviously Zach. Some of the tech that we use in the project is Vue.js. We got some Python. We have Figma files for the UX UI and Google Sheets for those that really wanted to know the tools we were using. But my role with the team was to enrich the user experience at its core, using the data itself. Next slide, please. The fellowship very much so had a modern day Scrum development feel to it. That's a new term I had actually learned in the past couple of months, where it's these little meetings of, you get together, you talk about what your next steps are or what roadblocks you have. You discuss how to get around them, what you're going to be doing, and then you move on. You actually just go do it. That's a very, very rough description of Scrum. So don't take me as an expert, but it's just something I picked up along the way. So we had a kind of huddle and tinker process. So every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m., the whole team would get together and discuss and offer input to one another on roadblocks. We discuss next steps and kind of hold each other accountable using some notes. On an ad hoc basis, I would meet with Zach in the event that we needed to have like an in the weeds discussion about any necessary changes to the data that would otherwise hog up too much time in our group discussions. But during the tinkering stage, using things like Python, once our roadblocks were assessed and our action items were identified, I would just take some time out of my week and throw some solutions at the enhancements we had talked about at the beginning of my 8-week journey. In the event that I had any other questions, the team was really accessible. It's a great group. So we talk on Slack. And obviously you can see here, I use the little symbols for fun, but we'd meet on Google Meets, similar to a lot of other groups. So then we kind of just repeat the whole process throughout those 8 weeks. Next slide, please. So for those interested, I did want to just briefly highlight a big picture overview of the primary tech and concepts that I explored for the duration of my fellowship as it pertained to a short list of goals that Zach and I had worked on with one another. So you can see that I was focused on some main database cleaning, whether or not the plants would be available at a local nursery, or if there was online shopping availability for the plant at a short list that Zach had helped me pick through. Some slide issues. So I also came up with a plant recommendation logic system and an application feedback form. And some of the ways I had addressed those goals by using things like WebDriver Manager, Splinter, Selenium, Pandas. These are all different Python libraries. And I use techniques like web scraping, the extract, transform, load process, and URL querying. Next slide, please. So rather than kind of just like going through each specific tool I use and how I used it, I wanted to address what I did by focusing on some user experience gaps that I helped to close using the tools and using the concepts I talked about. So thinking about the application, you might wonder, so I know that I don't get a lot of sunlight in my yard and I'll need a plant that tolerates shade, but pretty much other than that, I am totally in the dark, pun intended. Recognizing that this could be a very common occurrence, I developed a recommendation scoring system. So according to about 7 different metrics, such as drought tolerance, pollinator attraction, local nursery availability, etc. Each of the 1,000 plants in our database receives a score from 0 to 15 and answers questions such as the following. Is the plant good for monarch butterflies? Fun fact, that gives the score a big bump because I learned during my process that the monarch butterfly is a huge deal in the plant world. And, if it's not only if it's good for a monarch butterfly, what if it also is very resistant to drought? Even better, that's going to bump that plant score up a bit more. So I might have gotten that wrong. This might be getting this wrong, but with respect to the monarch butterfly, I'm pretty sure that it'll also draw in more birds. Zach, don't hate me if I got that wrong. I'm still learning.
Of course.
This brings me to a roadblock I experienced in kind of closing this user gap: expertise. So I'm not a botanist. So I wondered, how could I tackle this while not just doing a tremendous amount of injustice to what is actually happening in the botanist world and the ecosystem of Pennsylvania? So although I had some experience as a climate justice organizer, it's not a definitive list of I know all the things there is to know about plants, but I figured that drought tolerance would be an important factor with the impending impact of climate change. Other than that, with some of the other metrics, I knew that rewarding local nursery presence could have a huge impact on the community, and it would connect lots of amateurs with local experts and also boost local business. So I tried to use some common sense to pick from the 7 categories that we had and come up with a system that would ultimately just be genuinely beneficial from a general perspective. Next slide. I think actually go to the next slide, please, and we'll come back to this one. Yeah, thank you so much. This actually brings me, that process and that user experience gap actually led me to this one. Thinking about the application even more so, since I'm not an expert, like I mentioned, what if I miss something? What if our team misses something? I tackled another related concept to that, to the data in general, but from a different dimension: user feedback. User feedback is a must-have for an application like this. What if a plant is missing? What if there's a bug when a user clicks a certain plant? What if a nursery no longer sells a specific plant? That could really fundamentally affect our scoring logic. We need to know all of that information to keep our application as helpful as we want it to be for the folks that are going to use it. So I employed the use of a Google form to capture the aforementioned information and populate it within the same Google Sheet that houses our plant database. Just makes everyone's life a bit easier. And it breaks the feedback down into compartmentalizable data should we want to look at the big picture or do any analytics on it. That being said, we didn't only want to pull analytics from the user experience while being ignorant to the importance of the feedback itself. I think, in my early steps as a developer, and what kind of brought me here is that we can be so focused on analyzing the big picture of the data that we're not necessarily focusing on those like personal responses that are driving the choices that we're trying to make. So I found it really important, and so did the remainder of the team, to make sure that this form was very accessible. We made sure to leave space for a free text form where the user could communicate with us about their issues directly, which leads me to the roadblock for this user experience gap: accessibility. If folks are using the application and they're having a hard time typing or they can't type, we wanted to allow screenshot uploads, audio and video uploads, so that way we could better meet a broader range of users and not accidentally limit the scope because of ignorance. Unfortunately, Google, however, requires a Google email address to do a file upload. So at our most recent meeting, we've actually decided to pivot the feedback form to something the full stack team is going to develop. So that way it's a form that, though will be unique to our application, will be very similar to the Google form, but it will be overall more accessible. Could you go back one slide, please? Thank you so much. So and last, but certainly not least, you might wonder, what if I don't have a local nursery nearby? What if I love plants, but I don't have the time to get to a local nursery to make a purchase? That makes sense and is undoubtedly a valid user experience that I wanted to address using the data. So especially with the onset of a new COVID variant, going to public spaces might just be too vulnerable a choice for people to make, especially if they're high risk. But that doesn't mean they should be left out, right? So using web scraping tools like Selenium, Pandas, and Splinter in Python, I wrote a web scraping algorithm that would scrape for the presence of each of our 1,000 plants on that short list of websites that I had mentioned that Zach had given me. So that way we would know where it would be. And all these sites primarily focus on selling plants and seeds. So I took those results after running that search algorithm a couple of times and scraping from the different HTML pages, and I populated them to our database, which was a great 2-for-1 since it contributed to our recommendation logic score, because it being present online bumped the score a little bit as well. Next slide, please. So I want to close out my presentation with some lessons from mentorship. So Zach and I had a couple of conversations sitting down, just, he's helping push me forward in my new data engineering career. And he taught me a couple of things. One of those things is lead with why. It was something I wasn't thinking about necessarily in the beginning, but it's so important to lead with why you're doing something, why it necessarily matters for your users, why it might matter if you want to do something with a certain approach. It's so important to understand and to be able to communicate why something is important. From a data perspective, garbage in, garbage out is a phrase we've talked about. If your data is no good, if your data is if it's not necessarily clean, and when I say not clean, it's disorganized, or there are a bunch of extra characters and different things, that is not going to make for a pretty or enjoyable user experience on the front end. So you want to make sure that when you're using data for a project, whether it's for something like this, or even if it's for something more complicated, as the subject matter gets more complicated, how you vet your data should also adapt to that. So garbage in, garbage out. And last but certainly not least, impact. How did you help and how did you contribute? I can say confidently that coming out of my bootcamp experience, despite having other job experience and other schooling experience, it still felt difficult sometimes to be able to write about myself or talk about how something I did made an impact, which you think should be easy. If you were writing down a bunch of things, writing a bunch of code, helping a group. But sometimes it's easier for me to talk about what I did instead of how it helped So this experience, I think, really helped me kind of start to change that tune a little bit. And I was really appreciative of the advice that Zach has given me along the way. So next slide. Next steps. As for Code for Philly, I am going to take a break for the holidays coming up, but I do plan on sticking with the Choose Native Plant web application. It's a really great group of people. Everybody has some really bright energy, and it's just like a really casual and great group to talk to. Everyone's really interested in what other people are working on and gives great feedback and just genuine and sincere insight. So if you're looking for a group to get started with, if you're new to Code for Philly, and you have any of those skills we talked about, or even if you're not sure if your skill applies, reach out to Zach, reach out to our channel. I think it's PA Wildflower Selector on the Slack in Code for Philly, but get involved with us. And you'll see me there in January 2022 to pick up where I left off. As for my career, I am happy to say that a couple of weeks back, I accepted a data engineering position with a company known as Envase Technologies. It's been a great experience so far, and I'm really happy that I got the offer. It's remote first, which is something I really wanted. And for my skill set, I really do want to achieve technical mastery in, from both the data engineering and machine learning perspective. And then ultimately, what I'd really love to do is take those skills and contribute to ongoing social justice work. Next slide, please. Acknowledgements. Zach, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down with me, give me some tips, and help me break down the data problems that we had. Obviously, I have to give a shout out to the whole Choose Native team, Christina, Roxanne, Tom, Okio. Everyone's great. Once again, shameless plug, you should join our squad. And last but certainly not least, Code for Philly. I really can't express enough gratitude for having had access to this fellowship. It definitely did keep me going during the job search process, which can, I'm sure we can all agree, can feel incredibly overwhelming or debilitating at times. So it was great just to join a great group of folks who were interested in the same things I were and were kind of nerdy about tech like I am. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. And congratulations on the new job. That's wonderful news.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Does anyone have any questions for Anthony before we go on? We have a comment. This reminds me of the Oscars, worrying about leaving people out of the thank yous. That's true.
I did definitely have that approach. You're right.
I just had a quick question for Anthony.
Sure.
First of all, beautiful presentation. I completely agree with you in how this fellowship helped with the job applying process. But
Sure.
in the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned the Sunrise Movement. I've never heard of it. So what is that exactly?
So the Sunrise Movement is a youth-led organization that's focusing on kind of three different pillars of engaging with both the public and politics to push for more aggressive policy associated with climate justice. I think you can go to sunrisemovement.org and you will get a full explanation. I highly recommend. Great group. I definitely learned a lot about myself and just about the deep-seated roots of social injustices, both locally and on a national scale. Great work.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's go ahead and move on. Billy, this is actually your second Code for Philly mentee. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you find valuable about the mentoring experience and introduce your fellow for us.
Sure, yeah, this is the second time I think we participated last year, the first time when we had Zenzi join us. So it's been really great to partner with Code for Philly and welcome fellows to join the FLASK project. I think it should be said that we learn just as much from the fellows coming into the project as we hope to impart knowledge to the fellows as they participate. So it's always really great experience for us because it's a two-way street, and part of the ethos of the project is, kind of collectively learning. So it's really great that we can also kind of, include the fellows to learn, and they can also teach us things as we progress. So it's been great to have SAFE join us for this current round of the fellowship. And what SAFE was really helping us do is continue to try and scale. So one of the problems that we've had as a project is we kind of reach a certain number of contributors, and then it's difficult to maintain engagement. It's difficult to maintain the different work streams. And it's really been great to have SAFE help join us so that we can kind of crest past this plateau that we've reached over the years a couple of times, and really try to push forward and get more people involved. And that seems to be happening right now, which is really great. So I'll let SAFE tell you more about some of the things that he's been doing to welcome contributors, help manage those work streams, and talk a little bit more about the project. And we did have Romy join us too, so I'm sure she'll talk later as well.
Yes. Great, thank you. All right, Steve, take it away.
All right, hi everybody. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yes.
All right, cool. And I just switched my screens. You gotta love Zoom. So now the PowerPoint is here, but my notes are here. That way I'm looking at you and I'm reading my notes. So when I look up, anyway, great. So hi everybody. My name is Saif Sekalala. And I included my qualification here because it's relevant, and we'll get into that in a bit. I gave my presentation a name, theory, meet real world. And it's about, obviously, my experience, my project management experience with Flask, with Code Facility's Flask project. If I could ask you a huge favor of you, Julia, right? If we could please just, I wanted to give an overview of the entire presentation. So I just want to give folks just an idea of what it's going to be about. All right, so we're going to go through the slides. Just there's a total of 7 slides, including this one. But the topics that I'm going to be discussing today are, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So next slide, please, real quick. All right, next one after that, we're going to be talking about project management and about the different certifications and whatnot, and what is a project, this whole idea of like what a project is, the fancy, and then after that, we will be talking about specifically the Flask project, code fulfilling the Flask project from the point of view, from the perspective of a project manager, pretty much, okay? Next slide, please. And then after that, we'll get into my work. What exactly did I do with Flask? Next slide, please. And the next one after that is lessons learned, all right? And there are quite a few. Oh, went a little too fast, that's right. All right, lessons learned. And then after that, yes, final, just final words, future plans and final words and whatnot, okay? So if we could please go back and we'll get started. All right, so about me. I am there's just kind of three main aspects. You can group all this stuff together in personal background and my education and training. And then, so yeah, I'm a Jersey, Delaware Valley natives, so to speak. Well, rather adopted natives, what you can call it. I've been living in the area like what, over I think it's 16-ish years, give or take. And so yeah, I love it. Please grows on you. And these are kind of like my qualifications, so to speak. But I'm a career changer at the end of the day, because I found, regardless of, I have all that, I might have all that fancy training and whatnot, but in the end, I just stagnated, and I've dealt with either unemployment or underemployment over the past 5 years since my PhD program. And obviously the pandemic did not help either or whatever, but so hence my, this part of what led me to code, just the fellowship. Personality, I just wanted to just describe a little bit about myself, like, what am I like? I think my personality probably is hard to, getting to know me is kind of, I'm outgoing, right? Like, and those are some of my hobbies among others. All right, so I think that's a little bit, just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste about what I'm like. All right, if we could please get right into it then. Next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to start off like with just discussing a little bit about what the concept of project management, projects, my own certification, and just other similar certifications. All right. So so basically project management. So first of all, like PMI is I have the CAPM certification. All right. And it's given out by PMI. PMI is one of the leading organizations out there. It might be, I don't know, maybe I hesitate to say it's the best, but it pretty much might be. So like a lot of folks, I think you see on LinkedIn and other places, you see John Smith or Jane Smith, comma, PMP, right? That's for folks that have a lot of experience managing projects, right? The CAPM is for junior project managers like myself, okay? And then they have many other like certifications out there, but PMI is just one organization. So you have I believe Anthony mentioned Scrum. You have Scrum, you have things Agile, Lean, Kanban. You have all these different kind of paradigms of managing projects, right? Like in terms of like, just best practices and just systems of ways to manage projects. And then let's talk about what a project is. Okay, so what is a project anyway? Like, and I have it in with capital P or lowercase p, right? Like, because it just sounds, it has that, it sounds, fancy and whatnot. But really, in the next slide, we're going to look at 10 areas that according to PMI, you can kind of just use to define, features or aspects of projects, right? But it's a grand total of 12 areas really at the end of the day. And so the definition that PMI gives is a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result, okay? And the additional two aspects that are not going to be on the next slide, you have the project life cycle. So what, for instance, you have a product, like let's say you're designing, people that design smartphones or other like products, right? Like what happens, as you design that product in terms of like from the planning all the way through rolling it out, like selling it to the end user, to the customers, right? And then you have just professionalism, like ethics and professionalism. The one other thing I have to say is that different industries and different contexts have their own kind of like specific paradigms or ways of doing things. So for instance, NASA, right? Like NASA or the Defense Department, all these big, huge organizations, they have project managers, right? In fact, a lot of time in engineering and whatnot, in like civil or electrical, whatever engineering, you do have project managers, and the way they do things is very specific to their industry, okay? And so that's just one of the things that you have to keep in mind about projects. All right, next slide, please. Okay. So with that said, then I want to kind of just for us to take a look at Code for Philly and the Flask project in the, using the lens of a project manager. So, and again, this is kind of a little bit centric, PMI centric or whatever, but the definitions I think across the board can like apply. So with PMI's standards, right? A project, we've already defined it. That's just one kind of, it's like, I gave you the definition earlier. It's, you're designing a product or a service, or, it's supposed to be a one-time thing. And of course you always then you'll have maintenance thereafter or whatever, right? But in the case of Code for Philly is what you call a program, and a program is a collection of projects, right? So these are all separate. These are like different initiatives, okay, and might have one parent organization. In the case of Code for Philly, indeed, Code for Philly is the umbrella organization, but Flask, and then you have the one that Anthony was presenting about is Choose Native. You have other. I believe there's one that helps with syringes and whatnot, with like sharing syringes. You have all these different projects, right? So those are projects, but the program is Code for Philly. Flask is a project, okay? And these are like 10 areas that you can kind of break down in terms of like looking at, the characteristics of, if you're defining what as a project, what's aspects of Flask that you can kind of just delineate. Integration, for instance, we're moving from version 1 to version 2. Romy later on is going to talk about talk about that a lot more in terms of like the upgrade that we're doing, moving from the first version to the second one. Scope is looking at the app itself, and you have team capabilities, and I think Billy hinted on this a little earlier just now in terms of like the fact that we, there's expertise that we have and we need and whatnot. Schedule. For us, it will be a rolling basis, all right? And so there's different kind of like ways of like managing schedules. In Scrum, Anthony just mentioned, you have this like, what do they call them? They call them cycles or whatever, where, you meet and then you do those, like you meet and then you do like a quick review or whatever and say, all right, here's what we're gonna do, set out the plan and then go implement it and then like reconvene later. And as Anthony said, I'm also butchering that as well. But for us, it's a rolling basis. Like it's like the work is ongoing. And I'm not gonna go through the entire list, but because this I tried to kind of like just lay it out the way it kind of is. Communication. We use Slack. We use Hack Night meetings, etc. Stakeholders is an important one, so let me just I can just point that out real quick. You have CFP and the Flask team itself, us, and then you have the end users, the folks that use the app, business owners. That's very important because like we need to be able to convince businesses to let folks go into their premises to get water, right? City officials, government officials are a big part of it as well, and philanthropists as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you have the project lifecycle and professionalism as well. Don't forget that. The life cycle goes, the way you do things is like you plan, you execute, you monitor, and you control. And so, the way you actually do that is it's called a plan, do, check, act cycle, right? So you plan things, you do what you've planned, you check to see if it's working well, and based on that, you act in terms of improving it, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so my work with the project, with Code for Philly, with Flask. So these are the five main tasks that I've been working on during my fellowship, right? And I've been basically just doing them via that plan, do, check, act process that I just broke down. So this is where, and so on this slide is where I kind of just get into the challenges that I've faced, right, for the most part. The overarching task or tasks or goals are, it's a bit of a paradox in the sense that it's both simple and complex. It's simple because the app, as Romy will talk about later, is kind of just, the idea is straightforward, like what the app is, right? What it's supposed to do. And at the end of the day, it's not like the project shouldn't be too time consuming when you actually break it down. And in the end, using with volunteers, just with one weekly meeting, and just at the end of the day, we have like at any given time, I think you have like between 3 to 5 people that like really have to like support the project on an ongoing basis. The work gets done, right? But like it's also complex, especially from a non-software developers, because I don't have a background in software development, right? And so that was a huge has been a huge struggle for me because where it's a small scale, but it's growing, and there's a unique human resource expertise that we have, right? Like in terms of folks that, so I believe it's the MERN stack is what we use. And so you need folks that like front end and back end who can like help, who have the skills that we need to scale up as Billy talked about a little bit earlier. But at the same time, there's a unique way that the project is run. We use what's called a Holacracy. It's like a flat organization structure. There's a culture in place already. And so any changes that you make have to kind of, integrate smoothly within that ecosystem or that environment, so to speak. So for me, this was the challenge of it. Okay. Just kind of taking the theory and applying it in a practical way to the real world of the project. All right. Next slide, please. So as a result of the challenge that I just mentioned, or the challenges that I just mentioned, these were the lessons I learned. And that first quote right there, I mean, I believe most of you don't know me here, but believe me, I'm not a violent person, right? But just that Mike Tyson quote always just, I kind of I don't like it because of the violence, whatever, because of the color, so to speak. It's just that like it represents what usually happens. I'm a big believer in kind of like just bearing in mind that like Murphy's law, the concept of Murphy's law, you're right. Like you do all this planning and whatnot, but at the end of the day, anything can go wrong. Like you just have to keep that in mind. And so for me, that's what I found when I was like just working on this project. At the end of the day, all the theory that I learned for my PM Bach and for my like reference materials and whatnot, you know, it still does help, and I've still applied it, and it really does help. But it's just much messier, a lot more messier than the theory kind of presents it. I've also realized that I'm a slow learner, and that I'm not proud of that, right? Like I'm not proud of the fact that I'm a slow, but you know, but you can use that to your advantage. You can just kind of just figure out how best to execute the work based on your style. Okay, so that's another kind of like big lesson that I've learned there. And then just you gotta be patient. You gotta have humility. Just go with the flow. Or go with the flow. Things aren't always just gonna go your way. And so for me, and then one other thing is the fact that like as Billy might attest, and I have to be a little bit cryptic about this, but like I'm going through like I'm at a crossroads in my life where not just career wise, but like with a lot of things, and so. I've learned a lot. I've just learned a lot of lessons from working on this project. Not just so for me, this has been just more than a mere resume building kind of initiative. I'll say. Okay, and finally the next slide. Last lesson. All right. So basically, future plans. Right. So what now? I want to stay with Flask. I really do. If only because, just to be honest, and I've been telling Billy this, is like I feel like I haven't really performed as well as I would have wanted, like as I could have, right? And so I just want to stick it out a little bit longer, kind of just learn more, contribute more, because again I feel like just I'm a little hard on myself, maybe, or maybe really objectively I just feel like I haven't given as much as I could have, and again part of it is because of like just the challenges that I'm going through. I want to pay it forward as well. Okay, I want to pay it forward. So Code for Philly and has been very generous to me with this fellowship, and I want to look out for ways to also kind of mentor people in the future. You know, helping people grow in their careers, and I do want to keep growing just in a holistic sense. The last thing I will say this. The last thing I'll say is this: gratitude is underrated. Gratitude. Lately, I say this all the time. Gratitude is underrated. So I just want to thank Billy for your patience dealing with me, kind of just you know, mentoring me and just dealing with me, and the Flask team as a whole. Everybody has been great. Kind of just you know, showing me the ropes. Marika, CFP, Code for Philly, for the this great opportunity. It's I'm really grateful for it. I cannot thank you enough. And that is my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. And so I think it really speaks to your humility that you're talking about, you know, continuing to learn and paying it forward. I feel some kinship. I was a PhD in communication sciences and then applied to a project manager position at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So I'm just going to put in a little plug. I have no idea what your career ambitions or interests are, but I know for a fact that institutions like Children's Hospital and Penn and other institutions like that would greatly value your experience and talents in project management, communication, and any knowledge of tech and tech skills are highly valuable for these kinds of organizations. So are there any questions or feedback for SAFE?
I'd just like to chime in too and share that it's been a real great pleasure having SAFE on the team. You know, I want to reiterate again that SAFE, in addition to all of us, we're learning together. And I think, as he mentioned during the presentation, we do operate with somewhat of a unique holacratic structure, which is maybe a little bit unconventional, and there aren't necessarily best practices. So we ourselves are learning how to kind of operate as a holacratic group, which is, as he mentioned, like a flat diffused group. But I really admire his tenacity and kind of figuring out how to navigate a new group of people in our circle structure and how to get these different groups to be cooperating with one another, especially without necessarily having some of the technical background to understand what all of the groups are doing. So I think it's been great. And I think most importantly too, as I was mentioning before, the group needs more people and more project management to help the group scale. And I think SAFE's been really great in helping us build that foundation to help take over the weekly hack nights, cadence, maintaining our notes logs and things like that, which as we've seen over the past month or so, people more have gravitated to the project. And hopefully as we continue to firm up those foundations through more project management, we'll be able to continue scaling more people's involvement. So yeah, I just want to also share that it's been really great having you, Safe, and your spirit and being a welcoming force to the project. And hopefully we'll be able to keep growing and building out these resources that enables everyone to join the project.
Thanks, Billy. Appreciate it. You've been great. Thank you so much.
Let's see. Steve Thompson, you have a raised hand. Does that mean you'd like to comment?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
So thanks for the presentation. This is a basic PM question. I've learned some PM concepts before Agile, and I kind of got, in the most positive sense of the words, I got the impression that a project manager's best skills are being a professional nagger. And I understand that Agile may have changed that somewhat, but does that still apply or not?
That's a very good point. And oh my God, I just feel like it kind of sums up a dirty truth about project management, right? Like, that's honestly part of our role. And I feel like, so during hack nights, I've been kind of trying to walk that tightrope of being just on the one hand kind of right, but basically yeah, you don't want to be on folks' case too much, kind of just but for instance, all right, yeah, there has to be clarity of, okay, because there's a lot of technical speak, right? Okay, we're doing this, there's libraries and there's components, and we're doing this and we're doing that. And so, and not just for myself, but I'm thinking, all right, so for instance, if we had set a goal of, all right, we're gonna be working on tickets, and then you don't want to, the group, you're trying to help out in terms of not getting bogged down. So about, all right, so how about we do that, right? So pretty much, I feel like it is there's some truth to it, of course in a nuanced way, but I'd say yeah, it's a little bit kind of to be, communication is a big, you have to be a great communicator, and you have to have good people skills, good diplomatic skills, nudge folks in a way that will not annoy them too much, basically.
Yep, great, thank you. And certainly I think not having as much tech experience as you want, it'll come, and whatever you have brings a lot to the table.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Right, thank you so much. All right, our last presentation of the night will be Romy, and I believe Julia Schomburg is still tied up in a meeting, right? I do not see you on the participant list. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and introduce Romy. She has been present at our leadership meetings. I know you've also been working with the Flask project. So we're excited to hear about your experience with the fellowship.
Thank you so much. So yeah, we can get started on the first slide. The first slide is fine. Yeah, so I'm Romy Hegdegert, and I'll be doing a presentation on applying UX design methods to development. You can go to the next slide. So before I go into my educational and career background, I wanted to start off with the quote by a UX designer, Fred Beecher. Beecher talks about how he can sum up what a UX designer does with 2 words: humanize technology, or better put, leveraging human-centered technology. As a developer, one of the many things that excited me about this UX fellowship was the opportunity to level up my skills as a developer in order to incorporate UX methods, leveraging the power of technology to make positive impacts for humans. I suspected that doing this fellowship would help me be a good advocate for the end user. And I hope that as I share my experiences in my UX journey with you guys, that you'll see that it did just that. Next slide. So how I got here, and forgive me because the slides for some reason are coming out a funky color than what I had actually created. A little about myself. I completed my undergraduate degrees in French and psychology, which are not on there, but should have been, at New York University. And after graduation, I moved back to Philadelphia to find work. I was actually born and spent a good portion of my childhood raised in Brooklyn, and I moved to Northeast Philadelphia at the age of 10. And then after college, since Philly seemed like the best place to go for my postgraduate career, I ended up using my psych background to work in Philadelphia Social Services as a behavioral health counselor. I spent most of my time working with at-risk youth, delinquents, adjudicated pregnant teenagers. And at the very end of 2019, my organization was unable to receive the needed funding that it needed from DHS and had to close the program. So laying off my department and a bunch of other departments. And then heading into 2020 with the pandemic and time to think about my career and my life choices, I decided to do something that I've always wanted to do, which was code and make a much needed career shift. I completed UPenn's full stack web development program and have been building applications ever since. Next slide. So here's a brief overview of the UX design fellowship that I was involved in. Every Monday evening, I would take part in a team meeting where leadership for Code for Philly would engage in discussions about updates, various needs of the brigade projects, marketing, events, and then plans to get the users more engaged and onboarded. The UX mentorship, the UX mentor partnership is where I met with my mentor, Julia, a few times a week in order to get a better handle on my career goals, get advice about the industry, and update her on my UX related research and analyses. Code for Philly provided access to meetups and workshops where we gained skills and advice from professionals in giving tech talks and being a successful technical writer. As part of being involved and contributing code to my chosen brigade project, which is Flask, I would join other developers, leads, and designers for about 3 hours every Tuesday and discuss code and individual progress on the actual project. My fellowship also involved doing a UX analysis on the Code for Philly website, describing how users are engaging and interacting with the site. And then finally, a presentation and blog post. Next slide, please. Oh, goodness. Again, sorry, apologies for the coloring. So I thought it'd be helpful to share how I went about getting started at Code for Philly. Step 1 is find. Using the Code for Philly to find a project that you're interested in contributing to. The Code for Philly website has a lot of projects that you can take part in, and this step just entails you to look through the directory and read more about each project and mission. Communicate. Creating a Slack account, finding project channels, and contacting the leads. Slack is one of the best ways to communicate with other members at Code for Philly and getting involved in the community. Hack. Attending a project's hack night is one of the best ways to get involved with that individual project. It's an informal way to hang out with the members of the project and hold discussion of what needs to be developed. And the last one, which unfortunately you guys can't see, ship. Again, it's understanding your role and what is needed in order to ship code. Again, once your role is established in that brigade project, being able to deliver on the code or task that you decide to take on. Which brings me in talking about the brigade project that I decided to get involved with, Flask. Next slide, please. This is Flask, one of the oldest active projects at Code for Philly. Its name is a play on words of the word flask, using the PHL to identify the city of Philadelphia and the ASK, ask, so users can ask for a way to find resources. Next slide, please. So Billy Hannafy created Flask as a proof of concept that public resources can be mapped in the city of Philadelphia. Doing so not only raises awareness for the existence of these resources, such as foraging for food and finding free access to water, but also helps the community eliminate waste and curb their habits that are harmful for the environment. Next slide, please. So I wanted to showcase some of the impactful team members of the Flask team. Billy, the founder who I mentioned before, is an environmentally and sustainability driven individual. He created the Flask app as a way to build sustainability into actual behavior. You have Gabe, who's one of the more senior developers in the group, working alongside Tommy, another developer that helps volunteers like myself get onboarded and assigned to tasks based on their experiences and their interests. Lisa, with the help of another UX UI designer, Maureen, they were quite important in getting the new look for the Flask app in the redesign that they have for what they're calling the Flask 2.0. Next slide, please. And here we have one of the more important aspects about the Flask app is its ability to manage its many data points so that the users can access local resources through map filters. I onboarded onto the project during a very exciting time in that the Flask team were just putting the final touches on a new crowdsourcing tool. The crowdsourcing feature would allow users an additional way to engage with the app by having users add additional locations for water sources and food banks. Why is this feature important? Crowdsourcing allows the community to be more involved in sharing information. It also involves engaging with a wider pool of people and diverse users to input data and not solely relying on the data coming from the application creators. So it not only has an advantage in engaging its users, but gets the app more exposure and being talked about. So how does it work? It's pretty simple. I included a GIF in the presentation, but all you have to do is just click on a plus icon on the bottom right side of the application. Then you're there, you're led to a form where you can choose what type of resources you'd like to share details about, whether that be water, food, etc. Once you choose the resource, the user then adds both details about the resource, the name, the location, whether it's a public or private resource, and they can even include a picture if they want to. The user submits the form and the location gets added to the database after verification. And then another really cool announcement is that the Flask has a LinkedIn page that's active and running. And just to like sort of plug it in there, I kind of wanted to take the time to sort of throw it in the chat, which I'll do right now. So that way you guys can check it out and learn more about the actual application and how you can get involved, because it's really a great cause. Next slide, please. One of the issues that I put a lot of time and work into was the refactoring of the component organization for the repository. Essentially, my job was to take the code base and try to better organize the features of the application so that the files were more readable, understandable, and clean. So why was refactoring the components important? Well, doing so improves the developer experience and increases the retention of volunteers. For all of the new volunteers that come onto the project, they'll have an easier time becoming familiarized with the code. Refactoring components also becomes very handy when adding new features and trying to spot or fix bugs. Next slide, please. One of the other fun things happening at Flask is that we're getting ready to engage in an UI overhaul of the application. I came onto the project to provide my front-end development skills just as they're preparing to implement new designs of the current application. Why are they considering the UI overhaul? Like refactoring the components, not only do we want to make it easy for volunteers to contribute, but we want the new designs that the UX designers created to be used so that Flask users can interact with the app better. A UI overhaul can also improve the overall experience and the app's functionality. But how do we approach the UI overhaul? Do we rebuild from scratch or do we simply refactor? Both approaches have its benefits and disadvantages. With rebuilding the UI, you have the opportunity to start the code from scratch and getting it right from the ground up. Another disadvantage is that the whole process of rebuilding the code base is time consuming and it may take longer to see results. And because it's being rebuilt from scratch, you may run into more chances for bugs and the issues where components are not rendering as intended. But one of the positives of a rebuild is that it improves the organization of the code base and its readability, which makes it easier for volunteers to contribute. With refactoring the front end code, You're more likely to see improvements because all you're doing is changing how the code is written and how the features are being used. The users might not see the changes right away because you're just changing the logic of what's already there. With Flask, the current developers are looking to leverage the Material CSS framework to refine how the UI currently stands. With refactoring, you also be dealing with reiterative code, meaning that once you've leveraged a feature to use the Material framework, it's that much easier for a developer to refactor another feature and access the Material library. Also with refactoring, since you're not building anything from scratch, you can work on entirely new features while still refactoring the code base. Next slide, please. So the fellowship itself helped me develop skills that I know will be beneficial in advancing my career in tech. Working in a volunteer field environment gave me the ability to adjust and shift purpose whenever I had to, so that particular needs could be met. The fellowship helped me develop an ability to purposefully go with the flow and become comfortable in asking for help whenever I felt that I needed to. My communication skills was definitely improved since I began this fellowship, and my abilities to actively listen to what my peers might need done on an app or what the user might need from the app also improved. Joining Flask and making connections with so many in the Code for Philly community helped me with my goal of breaking into tech, coming from a non-traditional background. The other benefit to doing this UX fellowship was also learning how important it was from a UX design and research standpoint to make sure that users are connecting with the app that's being created. Extending those lessons about user app connection, I also learned about the importance of user research and knowing what a user needs from an app and how they're interacting with that app and testing the app's functionality. Next slide, please. Which happily leads me to the next part, Tendo Systems. Just a few weeks ago, I was hired at my first professional job at a digital health startup. It's a software company whose mission is to build a healthier, more integrated world by creating and delivering technology that makes healthcare management seamless. The company is doing so much to facilitate communication between patients and clinicians, and I get to be a part of that. And I honestly don't believe that this job opportunity could have been possible without this fellowship and the mentoring that I received from Julia, from her advice about working in tech and what to embrace and resume feedback, and the UX knowledge she passed on to me. Julia helped me change my thinking as a developer and be more effective about leveraging that human-centered technology that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. Next slide, please. So, next steps. Having had such a positive experience and learning so much at the UX Fellowship with Code for Philly, I do plan on continuing to volunteer with Flask and with Code for Philly. Career-wise, I'm looking forward to all of the impact that I'll be making at Tendo Systems as an associate software engineer. I'll continue to build relationships with others in the tech community, especially with UX researchers and designers. And I do plan on taking freelance work to add to my portfolio, but doing so as a human-centered technologist. And that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity and allowing me to share my journey and experience with you guys as a UX fellow. It was an absolute pleasure, and I learned so much from every aspect of the fellowship itself.
Yes, thank you so much. That's wonderful. Great presentation and wonderful news on the new job. Sorry, Julia, we were a little ahead of schedule, but if you had any comments or feedback for Romy, let us know.
What a pleasure it was to be your mentor, Romy. I look forward to continuing to bother you throughout the rest of your career.
I think it's the reverse. I'll bother you, so no worries.
It's great.
Wonderful. And any questions for Romy before we wrap up here?
Just a quick comment. Well, good job, and it was great working with you, Romy. Yeah, so good job all around.
I wanted to
Thank
echo
you so much. I had a good time, like working with the Flask and Billy too. It was an absolute pleasure. I mean, it's not over because I'll continue to work and help out in any way that I can, but it's been fun. It really has.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo too. It's been great having you join the team and share your knowledge with us and continue to help us grow. So we're looking forward to all that work you just showcased and helping it move forward.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to all our fellows who presented today, and thank you to everyone who came and supported them. You can get updates from Code for Philly via Twitter and our website, and look for upcoming events on Meetup. Yeah, thank you to all the presenters, all the mentors, and thank you for coming out tonight. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Good night.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, bye.